Good morning. Hi, everyone. This is Kim Ware, and this is my little bonus event on becoming a better listener. As we work through public speaking and presenting, it dawned on me that we are doing a lot of talking, but one of the biggest aspects of communication is not being only able to speak well, but it's being able to listen well. And this is a field in human communication where researchers have just spent a ton of time. And I'd like to share some of this information with you to help you also become a better listener. Whether you're going to be a paralegal or you're going to be an exercise professional, perhaps you'll be in the healthcare field, maybe you will go on and get further education. Wherever you are in your life, even with your family, in your personal life, you have to be able to listen well. There's an old Billy Madison phrase that says, I can see your mouth moving, but I can't make out the words. And I want you to be able to make out the words. So without further ado, let's talk about becoming a better listener. The first thing that you really need to understand is that there's an actual model of communication. Now, this is stuff that we've been doing our entire lives. One of the best parts of communication classes is that you get names or labels to be able to become more conscious of your communication. So in the model of communication, it's not linear, right? We don't speak, then receive, then speak again. It's transactional, meaning that we are constantly sending messages, we're receiving a message, and along with that, the message is housed within feedback from the people that we're in conversation with, the audience that's listening. There's a particular context that frames the communication, whether you're in a coffee shop with friends or you're in a meeting sharing a business plan. Then, in that context, we also have this noise that happens that gets in the way of making sure that our messages are sent and received the way that we intend them to be. This noise can be noise just in our own heads. Have you ever tuned out when someone is speaking to you? This happens to me, unfortunately, all the time with my kids. They are talking to me about something random. Not random to them, it's important to them, but as the mom, as the one who's running the show here, I am thinking of all these different things, and so I focus for a little bit, and I know that I'm nodding my head. They think I'm still listening, but I've tuned out. In general, fun fact, people have about an 18-minute attention span. That means when you are speaking, people can listen to you intently for about 18 minutes, and then they need something to wake them back up. So let's talk about what are these stages of listening. We've talked about the communication model. Now let me share with you the stages. The first stage of listening is receiving. This is where the information is coming to you. We're just taking it in. In the second stage of listening, we're getting to this idea of understanding. And that means we're not only receiving it, but we're starting to create links with what we're receiving to other pieces that we may already know. When we're understanding things, we might ask questions, try to paraphrase what the speaker is saying so that we are understanding it. The third stage is remembering. During this stage of listening, we're identifying the central ideas. We're summarizing it either verbally or intrapersonally in our own mind to make it easier to retain for ourselves. So you might repeat ideas either out loud or in your head and continue that process of asking questions to clarify the meaning. The fourth stage is evaluating. During this stage, we're not only making sense, but we're evaluating whether the information is worthwhile or not. We try to identify any biases that we may have So for example, someone may be sharing their thoughts with you on the legalization of cannabis in various parts, and you might be for it or you might be against it, but as they're sharing it and we're trying to understand and receive the information, we are evaluating our own biases that might keep us from hearing what the person is saying. Then we respond. This is the final stage of listening. We've gone all the way through receiving, understanding, remembering, evaluating, and we respond to the speaker. When we respond, it's best to use I messages instead of you messages. This sounds something like, I hear you saying this. Is that correct? Instead of saying, you are saying, because when we use you messages, we make the other person defensive. And we don't want people to be defensive. We want to be able to take responsibility for our own thoughts and our own feelings and engage in civil conversation. Did you know that we all go through these stages of listening, but that we all can have different strategies that work best for us when we are listening to other people? Some of these stage strategies include focusing in, asking questions, paraphrasing or summarizing back what the other person is saying, doing a little self-talk. Remember we talked about those biases, gathering full understanding, and using those I messages. Did you know that you have a style of listening? That's right, you do. It's legit. You have a style. You could be people-oriented, action-oriented, content-oriented, or time-oriented. I'm going to take just a minute and walk through each of these styles, tell you what happens and distractions that they can pose. So first, let's talk about these people-oriented listeners. So people-oriented listeners tend to be concerned with the needs and the feelings of the speaker. If you posted that you tend to agree most with the aptitude of empathy, you might be a people-oriented listener. The problem, or I should say the nuance of a people-oriented listener is sometimes we can get distracted with the needs and feelings of the person and be concerned about them instead of actually listening to their message. If you're an action-oriented listener, you prefer very well-planned, precise, organized, and accurate information. It can be easy if you're an action-oriented listener to become frustrated with the speaker when things aren't laid out nicely for you to understand. So those long-winded speakers, you might have some trouble and have to really work on reeling yourself in to catch exactly what it is that they're saying. Content-oriented listeners are analytic and they enjoy complex messages. So how many of you like going to listen to a professor lecture? What about a professor giving a lecture on something that's a little more higher up in that academic ivory tower? You might really enjoy that. Do you like reading really deep books? Then you might be a content-oriented listener. You like in-depth information and learning about multiple sides of the topic, multiple perspectives as you come to decide what you agree on. The problem with content is that there can be a lot of content and the thoroughness can be difficult to manage if you have a time constraint. Which leads me to time-oriented listeners. Are you a punctual person? Do you function by the clock? Then you might be a time-oriented listener. This listener is concerned with completing tasks and achieving goals. Sidebar, I may have been accused of being a time-oriented listener from time to time. Shh, I won't tell if you won't tell. So we don't like information that is perceived as being irrelevant. We want to stick to that timeline. I've got 15 minutes and go. That's probably why I have a hard time listening to the long-winded nature of my children because I'm always on a clock. probably should work on that just a little bit. Now, there's types of listening. We've talked about stages of listening. This is da, 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 da. We've talked about different styles of listening. And just because you might identify with one style more doesn't mean you can't engage in the other styles of listening. You absolutely can. And you might switch your style of listening depending on the context. But these types of listening play into that because different situations call for different kinds of listening. We have discriminative, informational, critical, and empathetic. Discriminative listening is focused and usually instrumental type of listening that is primarily physiological and occurs at the receiving stage. So the information is coming in and I'm discriminating on what is most important for me to take in and what is not most important for me to take in. Informational listening entails listening with the goal of comprehending and retaining the information. This is what you're doing a lot during school sessions. You're listening for information, you're taking it in, and you're trying to retain it. Critical listening comes into play when you have to be able to evaluate it. You have a goal in mind for the information, and you're critically analyzing it, thinking deeply about it to decide what is important and what is also not important. Part of the information when it comes to critical listening takes into play the nonverbal communication aspects, how the speaker is presenting the information with their body, and also the verbal communication, the types of words that the speaker is using. Empathetic listening is being able to listen with the goal of emotionally identifying with the speaker. It's also one of the most challenging forms because it can be difficult to understand where a person is coming from and to fully get the magnitude of the person's experience. When you're engaging in these different listening types, there are some things you can do to be an active listener. And this is really important. If you heard the term fake it till you make it, then these techniques can help you get there to the making it. Use appropriate eye contact. Different cultures have different ways that eye contact is functional. I'm going to look at it from a Western perspective as an American. So as an American, appropriate eye contact is holding eye contact with a person, not necessarily staring into their souls the whole time, but keeping their gaze, shifting your eye contact when it's appropriate, and continuing to maintain the eye contact. Summarizing and paraphrasing is a great way to make sure that you are still paying attention. Remember that 18-minute window I talked about? Well, you don't have to be passive as a listener. You can be active in making sure that 18 minutes doesn't sneak up on you and you're constantly sort of summarizing verbally or in your head what the person is saying. Giving appropriate nonverbal feedback. So if someone is speaking to you, but you're sitting like this and you're looking down or twirling your hair or whatever, then that person is looking at you for feedback signals to say that you're listening or you're not. Signs of engagement can be leaning in, eye contact is part of nonverbal feedback, a correct posture with your hands or your arms, your shoulders plays into that nonverbal feedback. You can also take notes, of course, and you can ask questions when necessary. So that gets to the point of saying, okay, Kim, you have given me a ton of information about listening that I didn't even know existed. What I encourage you to do is just pick one thing to really chew on. You can rewind this presentation and listen to it again, or just listen to that segment and think about what kind of style do I have? What stages do I see myself engaging in throughout the day? How can I use these active listening techniques when I'm in a personal setting versus when I'm in a professional setting. As you tease through these, just know this is not the end of the road. Communication and listening is a constant process of development throughout your entire life. I'd love to hear any thoughts, ideas, or questions you might have, and I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you. Bye-bye.